Okay, with this one, we're going to go over the question of the constitutionality of the impeachment, going over the actual question of it. And with this one, we need to actually start discussing on what is actually uh, an impeachable offense and what is not, first with it, and then we're going to go over on the actual time. I'll probably go over the time first with it of timeline and discuss why we need to discuss with that. Now, first of all, we need to discuss with it on how Madison described on the timeline with impeachment, basically, and why this is important. He basically stated that as long as as long as the actual trial is done within the actual impeachment trial is done with as long as they're in office, which means basically you can actually, as long as you're starting the actual process of the impeachment while they're in office, meaning you can actually do the House of Representatives part with the actual impeachment process the last day they're on office, basically before noon on the 20th of January 20th. You can actually start right then and there. And that's essentially uh, what actually could occur. And that that one thing right there is essentially what could happen. And uh, when we start to look at that, that's a major thing that needs to be looked at. And that's one of the things that would be the standard. Now, you wouldn't need any further than that. All you need to do is essentially start it. Now, you don't even have to have the actual person actually go through the House impeachment. Now, this is why some of these arguments against impeachment are essentially invalid. Now, a person could even resign at that point. If they're resigning, like right when that thing starts, technically it still is fully valid because the argument is not to remove them from office, which is the end for the end result. It's really the criminal penalty to block them from future office and to take away their actual benefits at the end, which is also which is also the other point. This is one of the things that needs to be pointed out. Now, we were also seeing people that are trying to make non-valid arguments. They're trying to say, "Oh, Trump has suffered enough with the idea of him losing popularity," or that's on some of these other things. They're trying to basically avoid questions. Rand Paul, with who I usually have agreed with in the past, has been trying to make these arguments and trying to basically avoid the actual question on real constitutionality and trying to state that, well, uh, the constitutionality question has never been tested on a president who's left office, so it must be assumed that it's non constitutional. Now, this is actually a point that we know that is completely non valid because the fact is basically the president should be considered as no different as anyone from the executive branch. If this method is what is used for impeachment is used for the executive branch, and it has already been tested for someone who has already uh, actually uh, left office with it. It was actually someone who actually resigned. Uh, they went through the impeachment process. They resigned, and they had gone into the Senate trial. Okay, they weren't convicted in that they did not reach the 67 vote threshold, and the end result was that they were not. This is for William Belknap of the Secretary of War under Grant, who was guilty of taking bribes, and so it didn't reach the threshold that it needed for the blocking of future office and taking away his pension benefits, such as that would have normally been happening from that point. But but he ended up resigning and leaving office basically in shame. And basically is and another argument that we've seen is, well, there could be criminal penalties. Well, here's the other point with that is, this is another one that Rand Paul was bringing up, which is completely invalid. And the point is impeachment is actually a political remedy. It has nothing to do with criminal courts or anything. That criminal courts are actually completely separate. In fact, you can actually be impeached, removed from office, have all your benefits blocked with it, and still be charged for the exact same penalty. If it is a criminal penalty that you're being impeached for, you're going to be charged for the exact same penalty, and it's not considered double jeopardy. And now if this were something that was actually criminal, that the uh, impeachment process was, we would actually say that this would essentially be linked to double jeopardy. Well, it's not. It's actually a political remedy, and this is one of the things that is not being discussed. So uh, this is why when people are trying to make the argument of it being unconstitutional, it is not that it's unconstitutional. Now let's go into when. That's why when we go into the actual dates of it, we should understand that the dates of this point are that you can't go into the ideas that it's not constitutional. It's uh, it can be done, as I said, the House of Representatives can start it at the last possible moment. They can start basically at 11:59 in the morning, right before the new president is sworn in. If they start their impeachment proceeding at that point, that is essentially completely valid, and everything can be done with it. They don't need to essentially do the full impeachment process of impeaching the president before he leaves office. And this is and the reason why is because there is no actual time tested thing for uh, uh, doing this proceeding to stop against basically these acts, because otherwise you can do impeachable acts and you could pretty much do them through late in your you can essentially do them late in your term and you can get away with it. You could essentially, as a let's say for as a president, if you knew that basically it would take essentially, let's say if you felt that it would take a year for an impeachment trial, a long drawn out impeachment trial, if you basically got it your to where your party could essentially make sure that it was going to be a long drawn out thing. It was going to be a very very long drawn out type of thing in each of the houses for both impeaching you and then removing you. You could essentially make sure that you had, let's say, 11 months and 3 weeks left. If you knew it was going to be 1 year, and you could essentially state when it came up to the vote, oh, he's out of office, it's no longer constitutional, we can't vote for it. And basically you could essentially, for the last year of your presidency, you could do whatever you wanted essentially over that, because they would essentially have to come up with a charge. So for the last like year and change, you could essentially do whatever you wanted, completely unconstitutional, as long as it's and essentially as long as it's not a criminal act. Essentially, you can get away with whatever you wanted to do, as long as it does not label itself as a criminal act, where you can be charged outside of office. You essentially could get away with whatever you wanted to do, and this essentially is what it could do with it, and as far as long as they could push it along for, and this is the problem. and and it would basically say with, well, however long that they wanted to push this impeachment trial for, forever what you could push it for. You could say you want 200 witnesses in the process to get impeached, and you want another 200 witnesses to for the actual process to be on the actual trial portion. And then in addition to it, and then you still want to rehear on the first initial 200 again, you want to rehear their testimony again. So what you could do, you could essentially drag it all along with it. So when you get onto the Senate part, you could essentially drag that as long as possible. And you could essentially make this real long to where basically as long as basically uh, pretty much you can guarantee as long as the president did his impeachable offense after the midterm election, he can guarantee that he will not be removed from office and he will not have to pay any penalty for it, any political penalty, as long as it's not a criminal penalty in which there's going to be a criminal penalty outside of office. And this is why, when we start to talk about this is why it's an invalid argument. And we've had plenty of people explain why it's an invalid argument. And it doesn't matter that someone's popularity went down with it. That's not an actual penalty for doing something politically wrong. You don't say you don't say, well, someone's popularity went down in the polls, so we need to reelect them with it, even though they've done something wrong with it. I mean, this is not how things go. You don't say, well, they're not as popular, so we'll just reelect them anyway. I mean, this is not how things go on the idea of popularity with it. I mean, is this what it called? Is that really hurting him? I'm sorry, but it's we cannot indulging into someone's shallow personality is not exactly something that you're actually hurting something on. I mean, someone that's shallow that they need to be indulged on their popularity polls is not exactly something something that is an actual real political penalty, because you could have someone that actually has lower popularity polls that might be able to find an area that they might be just popular enough to win an election somewhere. Maybe not on a presidential bid, but maybe somewhere else. And this is the whole point. And this is why we make that argument. And it needs to be made because when we start to look at it, is that it's not about it's not about making these arguments against uh, we should be making any arguments against impeachment. Frankly, impeachment and removal of office for unconstitutional acts should be made far more often. This is why we've gotten to the point of an imperial presidency and a president that, when we found Trump basically stating that presidency the power of the presidency is absolute. That is an impeachable offense. Yet nobody moved on it because both the Democrats and Republicans, actually want to take advantage of it. And this is something in which we need to actually look at as problems within the whole system. And when we start to view it, we need to view it more in the eyes of what's actually really going on. And when we actually find that, uh, we need to actually look into uh, the actual problems that's going on. Politically, because we see that basically both parties want to actually use this, and if we found that the impeachment was actually being used more often, which it should be, we would have this go away, because you'd have a president that would be scared to actually expand their power, because they could essentially be impeached and removed from office for it. You would put the fear of God into them, and that's something that needs to happen. And you're not going to find this fear of God if they're not going to follow the actual law. And basically, if they think that there's no repercussions, this is what's going to happen, especially with this. I mean, inciting an actual riot to essentially pretty much kill anybody that didn't file to uh, violate the actual Constitution and not certify the election for state, and basically try to not certify the election in states that he did not win. I mean, that's something that's quite insane, and uh, that's basically what was going on. Basically, he wanted them to basically not certify any votes in areas, but he wanted the VP to essentially not certify the election at all, the election win for Biden. And we found that basically is that we found that many Republicans still certified the election out there. And the fact is if these Republicans that are not voting for impeachment here are thinking that it was going to be any, they're thinking that they can get back in the good grace of Trump or these Trumpers, they got to be kidding themselves. Even people like Rand Paul voted to certify the election. If he thinks he can get back in the good graces of them, he needs to be, he's kidding himself right there. He, he should look no further than what they did in the midterms with Thomas Massey, or and actually this last election with Thomas Massey, how basically uh, Trump used one of his little MAGA lackeys to primary him in his own district. Now, if Trump actually supported him and supported this movement of being more liberty based, he would basically be supporting supporting these people all along. But he spit on them every step of the way. Now, there should be no reason to actually back these people. These people are clear enemy and will not vote for you. And actually pandering to them is not going to help. Actually, you should be fighting against them tooth and nail. You should be not supporting them, but essentially going against them. And any step of the way to actually eliminate them from the party should be your best option. And that's why what's happening with it is kind of insane to actually argue this thing of trying to play both sides in the middle. And that's what we're really finding with the Republican Party. That's another thing that's going on in the Republican Party as well. Is this kind of an understory with this is that still needs to be discussed. Is that they're trying, you have many of these people who are trying to play both sides in the middle, who think, oh, if these MAGA people leave with it, it'll hurt people's chance of getting elected. That's a bunch of garbage. And especially when you start to look at what Trump's policies have done, Trump's policies have essentially alienated these suburbs. And especially if you're a senator uh, in any state that basically is closer to being purple, those suburbs are crucial. If you lose those suburbs, you lose the election. Now, if you're a red state, now if you're a hard red state, you probably don't have to worry. But if you're an area that, especially that might have a liberal governor or basically has mixed congressional leaders, you should be worrying with that because if you're losing areas like the suburbs specifically because of Trump, because Trump was essentially just pandering out to non-farmer rural areas in his policies. You need to understand that basically is that that's not going to appeal to that many people. As anybody should realize, you have many of these rural counties that basically that some of the largest rural counties are about 20,000 people. That's the size of a small suburb, and suburbs are usually clustered together. And I was going to go into that on another. I'll go into that on another video that I'll do in a little bit. But basically, that's what is happening. They can put a lot of these people at risk just for pandering to Trump, and they could leave to either being a third party or going out to being Democrats just because of what they did. And that's why when it comes down to this thing on it with it is you want to kind of get rid of these people that are actually in the party that are actually not non-productive uh, on these non-productive views. You want to basically go back to the idea of being of of a pro-immigration, of the idea of pro-immigration, pro free markets, because those policies have actually helped the Republican Party out. Is but when you go anti-immigration and anti-free markets, those anything what happens with that is it hurts the Republican Party, and we've seen that. And you could just look at the numbers with it. When Donald Trump entered, the Republicans basically had a huge grip on the governors in the United States, huge grip on the uh, local mayorships, especially the sizable mayorships in the countries uh, of basically specifically the suburbs. They had they had they had both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. They even had the congressional dominance in the congressional bodies, the legislatures across the United States. Now you look at what's happening and everything's changing, and they basically, because of Donald Trump's policies, direction. And they need to understand this is what happens because when you lose the suburbs, you're going to lose your dominance because the suburbs are usually clustered together, and this is what's happened. And basically, the impeachment is their kind of way out. And especially when you look to the MAGA movement, is going to last much longer, and they're going to be stuck with nothing. I'll go into that in the next video, go into specifically on immigration with it, but that'll kind of show you where it kind of lands with it. But this is basically where they're going. And impeachment is specifically one that they can actually look at on the constitutional question. And they're right there within the constitutional question. It is constitutional, and they can just vote on that with it. Sure, people probably what it calls will probably exit with it, but it'll give them the people in the middle. And when we start breaking down party, basically your party base is only party base about 20% of the nation. There's a reason why Democrats went with Biden. They weren't going to go with someone like Bernie Sanders because frankly, is it would have been very, very stupid because the fact is that would have been a big question mark if they could actually win by getting someone who's far more moderate, you're going to get someone who's going to be a lot better at getting people in the middle. And as politics has always been, it's been always a race to the middle. It doesn't matter how you want to view it. Uh, if you want to view in more the more modern sense of being politically as a diamond, where you had the top of the diamond being libertarians, bottom of the diamond being authoritarians, left being progressives, right being conservatives. You want to avoid, you want to kind of avoid uh, getting stuck in your kind of area. Now, the MAGA people have really kind of avoided. They're not really true conservatives. They're more in that authoritarian camp, and and even progressives, even like the more like democratic socialists, they're really kind of in the mild authoritarian camp on the progressive side. So basically what ends up happening is if you get a guy like Biden who's like mildly on the progressive side, but really kind of right on that border with being being moderate or centrist, it really helps you out when you're trying to view that next to an authoritarian. That's why he was able to lure people in. Not necessarily as many as he could have probably done if he would have gone a little bit more further, but this was really a case of what ended up happening in the elect. That's why what happened in the election was it wasn't anybody for either side. It was kind of against, and Donald Trump had many more people against him, and that was what ended up happening. And this is why when and this is why what ended up happening. And basically, it was very very and he kept on with the lie, and that's what caused this whole blow up. And he kept on with this big lie, and he wanted to perpetuate for both for the start basically huge financial gain, and then later on for the because he ended up believing his own lie, and what ended up being for what ended up basically leading to the attack on the Capitol, which he ended up inciting. And now that basically they're trying to now you get Republicans are basically trying to you have some of them trying to play both sides in the middle, who are trying to go with the who have actually shown some courage and say, well, we don't want our party to delve into these crazy people who aren't even really loyal to the party to begin with. And it doesn't matter if you're what party you belong to with it, you can see that what these people don't really fit. Basically, you have the traditional Republicans that are basically just going to vote Republican no matter what. Some of those people are even leaving with it because they kind of see the writing on the wall that this is kind of this worship of Trump. Some of those people are even leaving. I mean, you've seen Arizona lose 10,000 voters automatically already because of that those actions. Yeah, the conspiracy theorists. Conspiracy theorists have no political ideology. Basically, it's whoever says the craziest things they tend to follow, and they more follow this idea of a both cult of personality and whoever says kind of like these crazy things that are popping up as a new conspiracy theory. They're not really party loyal. They're more loyal to the conspiracy theory. You have the next one, which is obviously the racist type of people. This is a very small group. It's not very large, uh, but it ends up being which of the parties tend to what it called tend to espouse to having more of these type of ideologies that they feel are better, that they end up voting for. Sometimes they won't even vote at all. You have the nationalists with it, which basically is a shared ideology between like your Trumpers and your Bernie Sanders people. Now, this is basically, as we see there, that's not even something that they're going to be very loyal with, because we know that they'll basically, if they feel that people on the left, like your Bernie Sanders people, are gaining more leverage, they're going to go right over to them, and they're going to leave the whole Republican Party. So they're only going to go with what they feel that they can get more push from. Who's going to give them more push in either side? And they're not actually party loyal. People believe in these this nationalism ideas. Then you had the last one that's basically there for his popularity, which is basically obviously it's going down. He's already removed himself from SAG, which is the Screen Actors Guild union. Um, you've seen so he's not going to be in anything more like that. He's not going to be in reality TV shows. He's not going to be in any more movies or any other TV or any regular TV. That basically is that he's pretty much not going to have a presence on social media anymore because of his inciting of the riots. You have that he's not going to have any more presence on anything else, and this just goes down into showing that he's not going to have any more presence out there beyond his small little group. It's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And people aren't people were starting to even when he started to run in 2016, that type of group was getting smaller as days go on, and he's really lost a lot of that. Basically what he has left is that conspiracy theory crowd, and that's starting to it'll get smaller as people go on with that QAnon stuff with it. As that starts to shrink out, that's going to go away. He was only popular with that because he was repeating all the stuff and going off all this stuff with it. That's why he was popular. Once that goes away, he's gone. They're going to go on to the next person, and they're just going to follow all those people like that. I'm basically going to cut it right here in a little bit. I'm going to do the one on immigration, explain where we need to go with that. So bye everyone, and thank you for watching.